Welcome to Understanding China 1700 to 2000, a Data Analytic Approach, Part 2, Section 2, Big Data and the Scholarship of Discovery. The beginning of the 16th century, with the scientific revolution, marked the gradual divergence of natural and what became social sciences, each with a distinct scholarly orientation. The natural sciences, on the one hand, increasingly emphasized the scholarship of discovery of the natural world. The social sciences, on the other hand, focused on the scholarship of interpretation of the largely human world. Thomas Robert Malthus's An Essay on the Principle of Population exemplifies the second kind of scholarship, and Part 2 of A New History for a New China largely discusses how new facts from big historical social science data are causing us to rethink the Malthusian framework of who we are. Part 2 of A New History for a New China, like Part 1, offers alternative perspectives derived from the creation and analysis of big social science data from historical and contemporary China, and from such studies we identify new objective salient facts to construct a new sort of history from below that contributes to a more global understanding of human history and human behavior. By doing so, our course demonstrates how new scholarship of discovery is redefining not just what is singular about modern China and modern Chinese history, but also world history and social theory. Now, unlike traditional history, which focuses largely on the biographies and actions of specific historical figures, A New History for a New China seeks to write a history based on the experiences of all peoples, elites and non-elites. This alternative history from below, not to be confused with the history of ordinary people, is already commonplace in Western history, powered by the construction of big historical data. Indeed, an irony of professional history is how, in spite of the worldwide decline of professional historians, big historical data is already having a big impact on the global academy. In this chart, you can see the decline of professional historians, the production of professional historians, defined by the number of master's and PhD degrees in history given in the United States, the blue line, and in China, the red line, contrasted with the number of scholarly articles published every 5 years, citing major big historical data sets. As you can see, in the United States, the production of professional historians has declined 1/3, from 1.5% to 0.5% of all master's and PhD students. And in China, the decline is similar, from almost 2.5% to less than 1.5% of all professional degrees given that year. By contrast, the number of scholarly articles published every 5 years, citing big historical data, has increased from 70-some in 1991 to 1995 to 300-some in 1996 to the year 2000 to 1,000-some in the year 2001 to 2005 to 2,300-some articles in the period 2006 to 2010. So a growth from 79 to 2,300 over the space of 20 years, while there's a simultaneous decline, slightly earlier, in the number of professional historians. So more interest in the use of professional historical data, less interest in being a professional historian. Now, these big historical data come largely from population sources. And what you have here are the 5 most popularly consulted data sets which were used to construct the previous chart. And they are the Integrated Public Use Microdata Series, based on the U.S. Census, collected at the University of Minnesota. With NIH funding, using largely the U.S. Census and other national census data. The Utah Population Database, which melds the genealogies of the Church of Jesus Christ and Latter-day Saints with the census and other materials from the state of Utah, the Balzac population database, which is based on vital registration from the province of Quebec, the Scanian economic demographic database, which is based on church records from southern Sweden, from a variety of parishes, and the historical sample of the Netherlands, which is based largely on, again, national registration data. Now, big historical data also exist for China and are also beginning to produce a new scholarship of discovery that is similarly beginning to rewrite our understanding of Chinese history. Over the last 3 decades, the Lee Campbell Research Group has created, largely from Chinese historical archives, several big historical data sets that summarize the life experiences or life events of over 1 million Chinese men and women in the Qing dynasty and the Republican period, that is roughly from the 18th through the mid-20th century. While these data summarize the history of specific populations and events during the last 300 years, the patterns they identify shed new light on our understanding of China as a whole, and more importantly, on our understanding of comparative human behavior as a whole. Now, these projects, these data, and the analysis of these data were accomplished by researchers and students from the Lee Campbell Research Group over the last 30 years. What you have here is a photograph of the research group in 2012. They include 4 of our important researchers, notably Gao Jing, who used to be the head of the local history office of Liaoning province, Sun Huicheng, Xiao Xing, and Xu Dan. And they include 3 different generations of students, postdocs, later on professors, at the Lee Campbell Research Group, beginning, of course, with the most senior, 5 professors, including myself, Cameron Campbell, a full professor of sociology at UCLA, Liang Chen, an associate professor of history at Nanjing University, Yu Xierin, an associate professor of history at Shanghai Jiaotong University, and Shuang Cheng, who, like Cameron, began as a student working with me and is now an assistant professor of history at the University of Iowa. More junior to them, more recent graduates are 3 postdoctoral fellows, including Byung-Ho Lee, who has a PhD from the University of Michigan, Li Ji, who has a PhD in history from the University of Michigan and is now teaching at Hong Kong University, and Hongbo Wang, who has a PhD in sociology from UCLA, working with Cameron, and is now also teaching and doing research at HKUST. And finally, our youngest cohort, 3 current graduate students at HKUST, Zhang Xiaolu, who is an MPhil student, notably, of course, my co-teacher, Dong Hao and Matthew Nollert, who are PhD students, one in social science, the other in humanities. Now, part 1 of A New History for a New China was based on half of these demographic records, largely in Chinese education, examination, and event archives. Part 2 of this class is based on the other half, 3 million linked household and population records that document the histories of over 600,000 unique individuals and their families and communities. Much of this data is already publicly available and can be downloaded from the following URL from the Inter-University Consortium in Political and Social Research, housed at the University of Michigan, in the China Multi-Generational Panel data from Liaoning, the Chinese Multi-Generational Panel data from Shuangcheng, and hopefully later, the China Multi-Generational Panel data from the Imperial Lineage.